And then for the PE exam, I think I spent about a year preparing because at that time I took my FE exam for chemical engineers, and for the PE exam, I was planning on taking it for chemical engineers, but I said I work in the environmental field. I'm probably going to stay in the environmental field. I should take the PE exam for environmental engineers.
Welcome to the Chemical Engineering Guys podcast, a show in which we share stories and tips from chemical and process engineers. We talk about student and professional life, as well as important aspects of products, processes, industries, and companies. But more importantly, what are the paths that these unique individuals are taking in this ever changing world? Let's get started. So, what's up, guys? Welcome again to a new episode. This time we have Chuku Oje, which is a environmental engineer. Well, technically a chemical and biomolecular engineer, but right now he is working in the environmental area. So he has been working in three different jobs, especially in air quality control. And well, I think it's much better that Chuku introduce himself. So can you do it, Chuku?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, my name is Chuku Oje. I currently work as an environmental engineer for the state of Michigan. My focus is in air quality control. My background is in chemical engineering. I graduated with a BS in chemical and biomolecular engineering from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I guess I have a lot of things that I want to talk about, and with that said, I'm going to hand it back to the chem engineering guy.
Perfect, Chuku. The very first thing, why did you decide to go from West Coast to East Coast for your studies?
Sure. So I had lived in California all of my life. I think up until that point, I had only been outside of the state once, and that was on a class trip to Washington D.C. And additionally, the area I grew up in, the weather's great, will always be great, but there was no snow. I always wanted to see snow up close. And I know that, Lake Tahoe is not too far, but I never got the chance to go up to Lake Tahoe. So come time for applying for colleges, I said to myself, I need to try something new. I need to go. I want to go on the East Coast. I want to experience what the East Coast is like. So that's kind of how I ended up attending the University of Pennsylvania. And interestingly enough, it's an area where I stayed for a good portion of my adult life before moving to the Midwest, where I currently am now.
So I think you have been experienced the most common parts of US, right? So West Coast, East Coast, now Midlands, very north, very south. That's great to hear. Chuku, let's talk about your bachelor, let's say, title. Why is it not only chemical engineering? Why is it a biomolecular part right there?
I never figured out exactly why, but based on the coursework that was offered, there is kind of like a huge bio component in some of the elective coursework for the degree, and there are it's a school where a lot of people, if they go into an engineering role, they're going to go into a pharmaceutical role. So the whole part of the whole point is to sort of tap into, the interest that a lot of people have in the bio aspect of engineering. And if you want to go to work at a company like Merck or AstraZeneca, then there are a number of courses that you can go into to sort of beef up your coursework. But this is only my guess. I never really figured out why they called it chemical and biomolecular engineering. And when I was applying to Penn, that almost turned me off. But I said, you know what, I'll go with it. And I saw that the core coursework was chemical engineering. It was just interesting that they would also add the biomolecular part. Kind of complicates things.
Yeah, I also think it sounds very great. Depends, of course, if you want something pure in chemical engineering, might not be a good fit. But as you said, if you want to go into the pharma industry or maybe some biotech stuff, maybe even go to lab research, I think biomolecular part right there is let's say, not essential, but definitely can play a role in your, let's say, next jobs or maybe master degrees. Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it a lot. There were definitely times where it was a struggle. Chemical engineering, I think, rightfully gets the reputation for being one of the hardest majors to
That's
do.
true. Yeah, I also think so.
And, there are a lot of challenges that come with it. There were definitely many sleepless nights, especially my senior year. But overall, I enjoyed it, and I don't think I would have chosen another major if I could do it again.
Not even now that you maybe have this profile as environmental engineer, wouldn't you prefer to have studied something that has that topic directly, maybe environmental engineer or quality control?
No
Or
way. No
no?
way. No, chemical engineering is incredibly flexible for going across disciplines. Not too flexible, but let me put it this way. If you want to become an environmental engineer, you can do it one of two ways. You can study environmental engineering, study civil engineering, or study chemical engineering. If you want to become a chemical engineer, you can only study chemical engineering. So that's where the flexibility comes in.
That's true. I wouldn't think about it, but that's true. It's easier to move into specific like niche applications than going backwards. If you have the environmental degree, it will be very hard. Maybe you could squeeze yourself into some chemical engineering stuff, but way easier to be just a chemical engineer. And maybe you can, like as you did, you got this air control or air quality control, let's say, applications, which we're going to be talking about.
Absolutely.
Chuku, did you ever, once you graduated, did you ever thought that you will end up in air control, or air quality control, or were you open to anything, or were you some maybe in some areas that you wanted to go and maybe not oil and gas? How was it your, let's say, broad idea once you were graduated from your bachelor degree?
I originally wanted to do either fuels, alternative fuels like biofuels, fuel cells, or I wanted to go into water, wastewater treatment, and a little bit about sort of how I came, to be in air quality. I graduated in 2010, and the world was still feeling the effects of the economic crisis. And at that time, as with the current situation with with the ongoing pandemic, I graduated into one of the worst job markets in recent history. Just to give you an example, most people in my class, in my graduating class, either went on to grad school, either because they had planned to go to grad school or they felt they had to do it to get their masters to make them more marketable, or they went into jobs that were not in the chemical engineering role. And for those who had internships, very few got offers. They had to apply somewhere else. So it was a very tough time. It was very tough to find a job after graduating, and I actually it took me about a year or so to find my first full time job. During that period, I had been working in a lab of one of my professors doing algae research, and I had a job interview with the city of Philadelphia for their. It was an environmental engineering role, but it was for their wastewater treatment plant. And how the city of Philadelphia works in applying for a job is that what happens is that you apply, you submit your application, you submit your resume. If you're selected, you take what's called the civil service exam. And it's just an exam that, determines your fit for the position that they're looking for. And it's going to vary depending on the job they're looking for. And I took the exam, I passed, and then after that, I had an interview. And I personally thought I did well on my interview, but what happened is that they ended up selecting other people for the job. And I said, okay, I thought end of the road, I'll just continue to apply for jobs. And at that time, I was filling out maybe a minimum of 7 to 8 job applications a day just to see, just for open positions and not getting a bite. I think I got like one or two interviews here or there, but most
How many?
one or two interviews, maybe three, and most of them, a lot of the interviews were for jobs that were not really chemical engineering. Some lab tech. There were a couple of process engineering positions that I interviewed for, but very few. So what happens after, if you get rejected for a job with the city, your score, you remain on a waiting list for a certain period of time. And if there's an open position, the hiring manager, they'll take your name from the list. HR will call you, schedule an interview because you've already done the test. So it just so happens I was called by the strange number called me. I ignored it the first time because I usually get scam calls on my phone. I have a prepaid cell phone, so it's common. So they called me the first time. I ignored it. The second time, I ignored it. The third time, my mother was living at home at the time. She encouraged me to answer the phone. So I said, okay, I'll answer the phone. And it was HR asking me if I wanted to interview for this air quality agency that I had never heard of. And I said, yeah, I'll interview. And I was like, okay, I might have caught a break. It definitely is not something that I had anticipated doing, but a job is a job. And if I need to move on to another job, I can do that. So I interviewed for the job. It was, the place was kind of city built, like, buildings that are owned by the city of Philadelphia. They kind of range from nice to like kind of like eh. And this building was kind of eh. And it also, it didn't really, it was kind of like a morbid place because it was located essentially above the city's morgue. So I had to go through.
That's so nice to
Yeah,
work there.
yeah. So it was on the second floor, but I did the interview. It went well. They called me later and said, we're offering the job. Do you want to take it? And I said, yes, I'll take it because I need to find a job. As long as I have a job, I can move on from anywhere. So I started working for the city of Philadelphia. First, I did more of their, special programs having to do with air quality, a lot of data processing and making of charts and doing trends. And then after a year, I was moved into their inspections and compliance department where I became an inspector. And that is where I started to learn a lot about air quality, different industries, emissions, how to control emissions, permits, all that jazz. And it's kind of, the rest is kind of history.
At the moment, were you liking the job, or were you always thinking to yourself that I should change eventually because I don't enjoy this? How was your mindset once you got that?
My mindset at the time was first and foremost, it was a job and I was happy to be employed. But at the same time, I said to myself, air quality probably isn't forever. I kind of still want to do water or something else. It was kind of something that I didn't take as seriously, although I took my job seriously. Air quality was not something that I was too enthusiastic about.
If you're not passionate from the moment, because this is so chemical engineering mind that we always think about the process machines and chemicals, and the least things we do is to think on the environment. I know there are a lot of chemical engineers that actually go to chemical engineering because of the environment, but I think the other part or the main part is no, I just want to do stuff, and yeah, the byproducts, I don't care about it. So when you end up in air quality, it's like okay, so it's not what I expected, but I think there's a lot of interesting processes for air quality control, especially for the emissions,
Right.
which hopefully we're going to be talking about that. But let's take our own pace. Now, let us know more on what does it feel to be working in a state, or not, let's not say state, but a government agency, or how, what does it feel? Is it nice? Do you have this idea of growing, or is it hard for you to maybe grow in those type of institutions?
Honestly, it's right now, I think it's awesome. For starters, at least in my experience, I have a lot of competent coworkers, and that's something that really, really helps make the job easier. If you have coworkers who do a half butt job or who don't really care about their work, it's going to make it really hard to function as a team. But right now, my coworkers, everyone cares about their job, everyone is good at what they do. We talk, we learn from each other, we bounce ideas off each other. It's great. As for being in government, the job is relatively stable, decent benefits. Most importantly, the work life balance is great. And that's something that I kind of underestimated, when I first began my career in government and moved to consulting. But that's something that you cannot underestimate because, being able to have time to yourself, being able to decompress or work on things, outside of work, it can really make the difference between being miserable or, just being burnt out or, working productively.
That's true. Definitely having a work life balance is something which many of us may consider underrated. But as you stated, once that you see the, let's say, the downside of being at a, not private companies, because I know there are very cool workplaces in private companies, but making that change from, let's say, a nice work balance at work, and then you go to the other hand, which is, I don't know, maybe extra hours, working a lot, a long time of commutes, and so on,
Yep.
then you start appreciating those little perks of having more time, maybe, or having a flexible boss that they let you to travel, maybe, or take vacations, maybe some short Friday or so.
Yep. I do kind of want to talk about the downsides of working in government as well, because I think those are also
Important to consider.
absolutely. And one of the big downsides is the lack of opportunity to explore different things. When I was at AECOM, I had the opportunity, if I wanted to, or if I fought really hard, I can work on projects, around the country. I actually did. One project I worked on had me traveling to, I think, two or three different states, different places, seeing different things. But you just can't do that working for the government. You're focused within either your city or your state. And then the other thing is salary and career progression. When you work for the state or for a local agency, your salary, the growth of your salary and the growth in your career is kind of stunted. You can only go so far without having to encounter more red tape.
What exactly do you mean that it's not easy to grow there?
Sure. Typically in a state or city role, you have a ladder of various positions within agency. So you'll have, usually it's a step progression. When you start working, there are two or three steps where you will have automatic promotions and automatic pay bumps. And the pay bumps are pretty noticeable. In addition, you have, what are called cost of living adjustments. We call them COLAs. Your salary, your salary increases incrementally each year because typically a city or state job is a union job and the union negotiates pay raises, but the promotions, typically there's a bigger pay bump. So when you get to a certain position, a certain grade, the automatic promotions cease. You still get your COLA, but the next position is, you have to be promoted. So you might be in a long line, against other people who are looking to get promoted to a certain position, and you may have to, work in one, at one pay grade for several years to be able to qualify to be promoted. And even then, you have to get sign off from your manager, their manager, and their manager. And then you have to submit it to, civil service, who will then review and say, yeah, we'll promote you, or no, we won't promote you. So that's sort of what I mean.
Okay, so way hierarchical structure, going step by step. You cannot skip, like, let's say, the next step. You gotta take it. And I also think it's a lot of that type of position. In order for you to get the next one, you will need to be there at least 4 to 6 years,
Yeah,
something
that's
like that.
yep.
Okay. And I don't know how is it there, or maybe if you want to talk or not, it's fine. But would you say that having the right connections could help you go further, or is it a fair play in which only the best go to the next promotion?
Fair play.
Well, that's nice. Then at least you know it's
It's
a great fair play.
fair.
Too good.
It's
Let's pass to the important part, which is going from this, let's say your first job, which is right now in the state of Pennsylvania, working for the city of Philadelphia in air quality control, to the private company, or let's say not, I don't like to say private company, but let's say the consulting agency AI. So did they call you? Did you were searching for a new job? How was it? Why did you change? Why did you make that transition? And how was the job?
Sure. So at the time when I was at the city of Philadelphia, I had gotten my last automatic promotion. So I knew I was gonna be there for a while. And at the time, promotions to the next level were few and far between. And by that time, I had gotten my EIT certification. I'd had it for at least a couple of years, and I honestly didn't think I would be able to, grow my career at the city. And I didn't think I would become a PE working at the city because there was only one PE there. And I didn't feel like an engineer. And I didn't see how my work could be construed as engineering work, but I'll more on that later. So at the time, I started looking for other jobs. And I think at the time, my focus was air quality jobs because I was getting confident. I knew, that was something I knew, that was something I was becoming familiar with, and air quality was starting to interest me a little bit. I still applied for, water jobs and all that, but I knew that I had a good chance of staying in my, field of air quality. So I applied for, I think I heard back from 3 or 4 places, and AECOM had responded to my to my application. I was able to have an interview with them. I had an in-person interview. At the same time, I had phone interviews with other companies, and I went with AECOM because they offered me the most money, and I was the furthest along in the process with them. And I felt that if I delayed any longer, I would lose that chance with AECOM. So I decided to go with them. And actually, before gone, before it was AECOM, the company that I had applied to work for was a company called URS. And at the time I was applying, URS was in the process of being acquired by AECOM. So I joined URS, which then became AECOM.
Okay, nice. And the job was what exactly?
So the job was it was to provide support to various clients across the DC area, so Washington DC, Virginia, Maryland, and we clients either needed to get a permit to install equipment that would emit to the air, or they needed ongoing organization of their record keeping, or they needed to, to prepare for inspections, or they needed help with preparing reports to demonstrate, either their compliance or maybe if they had an issue with compliance, what they did to resolve it. So that was sort of the gist. And clients were both governments and sort of private companies.
And what was the job title that you got there?
Job title was staff engineer.
And the main idea was to help the, let's say, senior consultants, or did you manage a team? How was it working there?
Yep. So I worked underneath a project manager alongside other staff engineers and staff scientists, and we worked on various projects of our own, or we worked on projects together.
Okay, and how was the distribution of you going to the, let's say, office, and you going to visit the clients?
So for me, it was. And honestly, it was more of an office job than a field job. At the time when I was working for the company, there was, during the merger, there was quite a bit of turnover. And at least for me, I kind of had difficulty in finding work to do. I had some projects on my, I had some projects that I worked on, but there was not a lot of variety at the time. And, with that turnover, we lost some clients, or clients went with, employees who left, or our longtime clients decided to go with other companies. So it was kind of an interesting time.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. Did you enjoy it mostly, or you enjoy it only when you worked, or why then you? How long were you there, and why did you decided to change of job?
So I was at AECOM for roughly 3 years, and I would say that I enjoyed it somewhat, although at times it was kind of a struggle, just because going from a regulator to a consultant, especially at a large firm, it was kind of a difficult transition for me, and I don't think I really got the hang of working there.
Okay, so that's why then you decided to apply, or I didn't know. Did you apply for the current job that you have, or did they search for you now in the state of Michigan?
Sure, I applied for the job I have now.
Okay, and was it because you wanted to go back to government and air quality, or why?
I had applied to both government jobs and private companies, but I was hoping to go back into government just because it was something that I had more of a feel for, and I had learned a lot working in consulting, and I felt that I would do a lot better back working for the
And
government.
also the life work balance, as we speak before.
Absolutely.
So why do you think there was not a correct life balance in the AECOM? Was it because you had to work a lot of hours, or what exactly was it?
I hope others will agree when they listen to this, but there's kind of an unwritten rule in that the number of hours you bill will be less than the hours you actually worked.
That's almost written in blood, but yeah, that's true. Unfortunately, the time we work is not exactly what we bill.
Yep. So, in consulting, we have something called billable hours, which is, you get a certain amount of hours to work on a project because everything's agreed on ahead of time. And based on your pay rate, you can only work this many hours because you're trying not to overcharge the client. But oftentimes the work will require many more hours than what you're allowed to bill. So typically you work X number of hours, but you bill kind of close to what you're the max allowed.
Would you say a problem of the project manager, or the one that, or do they know that they will end up making you or making the workers work more than the actual billing?
I think it's kind of a problem with the industry, but I also think it depends on the type of projects you work on and what the project manager is able to negotiate. Because if you're working on a small project, which is what I mostly did, there are not a lot of hours to bill. So you kind of have to be ginger with how you bill them. So if you find that you really, if there's something that really needs to be fixed, but you're running low on hours, you really have to sort of go the extra mile, but not bill that extra
Yes,
mile.
true. Yeah, it's harder. It's this balance between landing the client, but also not chipping in, or not chipping your work, but also you want to get the most of the work. But if you raise that, then you might lose the client. So yeah, I get it. Chuku, now that you are in Michigan, do you think your previous profile, what did it help the most? Was it because you already worked in Philadelphia, in the city of Philadelphia, or because you were from already working also as a consultant? Or do you think both were waiting equally for your new or your current job?
I think both. With working as an inspector, I had the experience in working in city government. I learned about air quality. I knew how to conduct inspections, and I knew how permits worked. Working in consulting, even though I didn't have a good go at it, I would highly recommend environmental consulting because it forces you to really have to learn a state or city's rules. Coming into that interview for the state of Michigan, even though I didn't know Michigan's rules, I could talk confidently about, federal regulations and how to write a permit because I did permit applications and I reviewed permits for other states. So it's a mix of both.
Okay, that's great. And also, I think we talked about the PE license. Was it also that you wanted to do it here in Michigan, or was it that you got more free time or maybe more money to pay or afford it? Why did you decide to get the PE license here?
Sure, a couple of factors. I had, at that point, when I started my job with the state of Michigan, I had been an EIT for 7 years, I think. And I said, a lot of my work is likely, engineering work. And I said to myself, I have the time, I could study. I've waited way too long. I'm going to take this test. And back when I took the FE exam and the PE exam have different modules. So it's composed into two parts. The first part is a general part that deals with all the general concepts: chemical, environmental, civil, mechanical, materials.
For our audience that maybe not that cannot be that familiar, the can you explain very quickly what is FE and the difference with PE?
Sure. So the FE is it's an exam. It stands for the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, and it is an exam that those who wish to ultimately get their PE license take. To sit for the test, you have to have an ABET accredited degree, or if you don't have an engineering degree, it has to be in the sciences. You take that exam. If you pass, you get a certification, which is called EIT, Engineer in Training, or another term called EI, Engineering Intern. And those certifications they don't really do anything for you other than, tell everybody that you're on the path to becoming a PE. After you get experience, you can sit for what's called the Principles of Engineering exam. Past that, you apply for your license for the state board. You get your PE license, professional engineering license. This whole process is something that is, specific to the United States of America, although I do believe that Canada has its own version of the PE. And essentially a PE license is a license that allows an engineer to offer their services to the public. So if you graduate with an engineering degree, you can still work as a process engineer or, a staff engineer, but you can't offer your engineering services to the public. Like, let's say you can't sign off on documents to build a bridge or a building or a plant. You would have to have a PE for that.
Okay, okay, nice. And this is why you wanted the PE, right?
Absolutely. I wanted that opportunity in more complicated projects, should the time arise. And I kind of also wanted to be a lot more marketable to employers because a lot of employers, they may not work on projects offering services to the public. They still want an engineer with that, license qualification. It looks good. It makes the potential employee look a lot good on paper.
But also more expensive to pay, I will assume.
Yeah, if the job is looking to hire a PE, they are paying that PE.
So would you say it's like a extra value that you will just for getting that PE license? How much is it to get it?
Depends on where you work. Where I work currently, the PE does not really have any added value. But if I were to jump to another job that required that I have a PE, there would be a considerable increase in pay. Now, for cost in terms of getting your PE, I don't remember how much the FE exam cost, but for the PE exam, and I think it might depend on the state, I paid $350 to take the exam. And then there are various courses that help you prepare for the exam. Those can be pretty pricey. They can be several hundred to over $1,000. But I just bought study guides and did practice tests and problems over and over again until I understood everything.
So how much did you prepare for the exams?
For the FE exam, I think I spent about 18 months preparing.
Wow, is that the average? people prepare for?
No, I think I went overboard.
Well, that's nice. Congratulations, 18 months. Well, that's a great preparation for the exam.
Yep. And then for the PE exam, I think I spent about a year preparing because at that time I took my FE exam for chemical engineers, and for the PE exam, I was planning on taking it for chemical engineers, but I said I work in the environmental field. I'm probably going to stay in the environmental field. I should take the PE exam for environmental engineers.
And would you say it's harder to shift from chemical to environmental, or was it not that great of a deal?
It was a little bit hard, mainly because I had to teach myself concepts that I had never learned in class. But luckily, a lot of the water stuff is essentially a material balance problem. So it works out.
Okay, no, it's not, that's nice. And you end up with your PE license.
Mhm.
And as you stated right now, I didn't know it, but it wouldn't be a plus for your current job. So I'm thinking or guessing that maybe you want to change eventually to another place that will use of that, or you just want to have it as a backup or to increase the quality of your work. Why the PE if it was not required for you?
To have it as a backup in case I ever decided one day I wanted to leave or if I had
Okay.
to leave. So,
Okay. And right now on the job, I think you have a lot of stories on how a, let's say, inspector, or right now, what's the title of your current job?
so, I'm an environmental engineer. It's plain as that.
Okay. So how does an environmental engineer working for the state of Michigan has its experiences? Can you tell us funny parts, interesting parts, boring, all? What, let us know, what do you do maybe day to day, or funny stories, whatever you think is useful for young engineers that maybe want to become environmental engineers or that are interested on the job.
Sure. So my day to day is this. I will have probably between 4 to 8 permit applications I'm working on. And when I receive a permit application, it's going to include what they want to do, their calculations, any engineering documents, site plans, and their regulatory review. So my job is to go through each set of documents, look through their calculations to see everything is good, look through their engineering documents and see if what they're planning to do is feasible, look at their regulatory analysis to see if they are going to comply with all of the rules. If there's anything missing, I'll let them know. Lots of times I will look over safety data sheets, and a lot of the time I'm doing my own in-house calculations to verify that everything they did is correct. Usually after that point, I move on to writing permit conditions. And so a permit is essentially a document that allows the facility to operate within the state. It essentially outlines what they cannot do, and what records they have to take to make sure that they are complying with the local, state, federal regulations. Sort of like a little bit of a background. In the United States, we have there are sort of three sets of regulations, laws dealing with air quality. They're all built around what are called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. We call them the NACs, is a set of pollutants that have been researched and identified as causing harm to the environment and human health in some way, shape, or form. Some examples of pollutants, we refer to them as the criteria pollutants, are oxides of nitrogen and sulfur dioxide. Those two components play a key part in the formation of acid rain. So we want to make sure we limit those because acid rain will damage property, will damage, forests and trees,
Crops.
crops as well. Another criteria pollutant is ozone. You may have learned when you were younger that about the ozone layer, the layer that sort of protects us from the harmful UV radiation of the sun. Well, ozone's also can be is treated as a pollutant, and at the ground level or in the sky, in the immediate sky, presence of ozone could lead to various health problems. There's kind of a saying, up high, good, down low, bad. So another set of criteria pollutants are what we call particulate matter. And there are two types. And it's based on
The size.
the mean particle diameter, mean particle size, PM10. So it's particles of 10 microns or less. And then PM 2.5, which is 2.5 microns or less in diameter. And you may be hearing about that a lot more as with the increased awareness of particulate emissions and air quality in general. There are a lot of companies making sensors to sort of count PM, and it's becoming a bigger issue now with the ongoing wildfires in Northern California and Oregon, and how it's affecting air quality and how particles are being released into the air. And those particles are known to sort of cause respiratory problems. So you want to limit those.
And those are mostly due to combustion, or where do you get those?
You can get them from a whole bunch of sources. Combustion is one primary source. Another form of combustion is just the mechanical manipulation of material. So if you crush something or if you
Okay.
pulverize it,
Like dust.
you're essentially releasing dust into the air. And then another criteria pollutant is lead. So if you're dealing with metals, certain types of metal handling industries, foundries, you might release lead into the air. I think I want to say I've gotten all of them, but I'm not sure. But that's kind of the general gist.
How do you get lead into the air? I didn't know that. Well, I will guess that it goes either as a ion in aqueous solution or maybe as a solid particle. But how do you get lead into the air?
Lead can be contained in various metals. One way is, again, you're pulverizing, you're crushing metals, and it can be in the form of dust that is emitted to the air. Another source of lead are foundries. So you're dealing with hot molten metal, and a lot of that lead can go airborne from that.
And it ends up eventually in in the soils and water, or do they remain in the air and we breathe them,
Some can remain in the air, you can breathe. Some you can get deposition into soil and into the waterways.
which is not nice.
No, not at all, not at all. So the goal over several decades, beginning with the Clean Air Act, I want to say I forget the year. I think it was 1970 or 1967. I forget the exact year, but there are various other air quality acts that were sort of implemented to deal with the growing pollution that was occurring in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. If you look online, or if you look at the history of certain areas, lakes used to catch fire because a lot of industrial runoff would contain materials that were flammable, and all you need is oxygen, a fuel source, and an ignition source, and all of a sudden your lake is on fire. So stuff like that, and smokestacks blowing black smoke into the air. So there are various episodes throughout history in the US and in other parts of the world where there are various air quality episodes that caused injury to people, fatalities. Typically, how something like that would happen is that you get a lot of emissions in the air, and then you get what's called a temperature inversion, where, correct, the hot air pushing the emissions down to the ground, and instead of being emitted higher into the atmosphere, the emissions, all that dust, all that smoke, then fills the lower area, sort of looks like a fog, but it's containing things that are nasty for your health.
Definitely something very important to consider, Chuku. And talking about this, what type of companies do you typically say? You already told us about the foundries, but I have here some examples you told me: electric vehicle, batteries, pharma industry.
Yep.
How why do they require this? I can imagine the one on the battery, maybe the lead or lithium or whatever they're using. But the pharma industry, why so? Do they need to carry out the byproducts, or do they use wastewater treatment? Why so?
At a base level, if you operate a facility, you're going to need An HVAC system, you're going to need emergency electric power source, and typically a lot of facilities will have boilers, generators, both if they burn a fuel like gasoline or natural gas or diesel, you're going to have exhausts. It's, think of your car. Your car has an engine. Generators have an engine. They burn fuel. They have exhausts. Boilers just say hot water heater. If it burns fuel, it's going to have a stack and it's going to emit. So at a base level, depending on the size of the combustion source, you're going to need a permit, and it's going to depend state by state. For example, for the pharma industry, for any manufacturing industry, you're going to have a raw material. And, sort of going into the definition of chemical engineering, you take a raw material and you convert it into something of value. But during the conversion process, depending on the type of material that you start with, so for example, pharma, you may have a lot of solid materials, and the handling of solid materials is likely to generate some form of dust. And that dust is likely going to escape the building either through windows, vents, or a stack where they vent all emissions.
I see now. So, do you have any other example on any industry or type of producers that maybe you say no, they don't pollute that much, and they do, and that the common population or maybe even chemical engineers will not thought that maybe this type of companies pollute that much?
Sure. Let's talk about scrap recycling. And this was kind of like a shock to me, but you take your paper or you take your different products, you put them in the recycling bin, and you ship them out, and then they take them. They say, they convert it into back to things that are useful. Recycled paper, for starters. So the manufacture of recycled sheets of paper is a manufacturing process, and that's going to involve the use of certain types of machines, certain types of solvents, and solvents generate what are called VOCs, volatile organic compounds, which are considered precursors to the formation of ground level ozone. So in a paper recycling process, you have to take the scrap paper that's incoming and manipulate it in a way such as to make that paper usable. But a lot of that's going to involve the use of various solvents to get it back to something that's usable. And those solvents are from that process are emitted back to the atmosphere.
That's true. Actually, that's a point to consider that even recycling manufacturers will eventually have some pollution. It's almost inevitable to have the perfect cycle.
Yep. It's one of those interesting things because an environmental solution is going to cause an environmental problem.
Okay, that's funny. That's paradox.
Yeah. So, for example, wastewater treatment as another example. In a wastewater treatment plant, you have your incoming waste stream, and you take it through this process where you add different coagulants to get all the gunk to collect, to aggregate together, and you scrape it, and then you use various chemicals to then treat the water. But, that process generates emissions, particularly VOCs. And you can have a lot of VOC emissions from a wastewater treatment plant, depending on how many millions of gallons per day that they are handling. Oh, and because they are, collecting sludge, you have odor problems as well. So that's a very common feature of a wastewater treatment plant. Nasty odors.
Yeah, the other is classic example of what will happen in a wastewater treatment plant.
Yep.
That's you can even have a smell far away from maybe more than 1 kilometer.
Yep, absolutely. So when I was growing up, one of my favorite field trips was to a wastewater treatment plant. They called it the honey pot. And oh boy, did it smell.
Nice nickname.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chuku, I don't know if you want to add something related to your current job or maybe on the job?
Sure. I actually want to talk about my first job because I got to see many different types of facilities, some pretty cool ones too. One type of facility that you don't expect, and it's going to depend on the area, is for me, it was the US Federal Reserve Bank. So, for those who don't know, the Federal Reserve Bank is essentially a government agency that is responsible for deciding how much money flows into the financial system. It's called the central bank. And, if you're aware of Mexico's central bank, the US Federal Reserve is the equivalent to that. And the Federal Reserve has different banks, different facilities across the country, and their job is to take all of the dollars that are exchanged over the day. So all of the nearby commercial banks in the areas, after they're done with their transactions and it's close of business, they send all their dollars to the Federal Reserve Bank, that specific location, for sorting, for inspection. They'll take a look at the money. If it's damaged, they'll replace it. If there's a counterfeit, the FBI gets called, stuff like that. So it's normal for a typical Federal Reserve Bank location to process about $6 to $8 billion in a day.
Oh,
So,
nice.
so
Can't even imagine how much that will be in weight or size. I cannot.
so it's crazy. So I had scheduled my inspection because they had a number of boilers and generators. It's their only source of emissions, boilers and generators. Remember, anything that burns a fuel emits, and depending on where you're located, you might have to get a permit.
Okay.
I'm at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. I performed the inspection, and I'm learning about the facility because my boss at the time told me, when you're on an inspection, you want to learn about the facility, not just about like what they have, but what they do in general. So I said, okay. The guy asks me after the inspection if I want to see the actual money handling operations. And I'm like, absolutely. He also, has video of an incident that they had where a fire occurred. And I'm like, I have to see that because your permit requires you to make note of any incidents that happen. So during the course of an inspection, I'm asking questions. I'm looking at each unit to make sure that they have the correct unit. I'm looking to make sure that they didn't install anything new. I'm making sure that the permit's in order. So after the inspection, he shows me the video of the fire that happened. And it was a fire that was caused by some leaking water that touched the transformer. And there was this cool explosion that occurred. It was a small one, but apparently the temperatures were hotter than the sun. So I'm like, awesome. The next thing is we go down to the basement. Now, to enter the building, I had to go through security. I had to, make sure that I was good to go. They had to check my ID, all that good stuff. To go to the basement, I had to go through a second layer of security. I go through that. They ask permission for me to enter. They take me to the basement. When I enter the basement, to my left, to my right, in front of me, behind glass walls, are money machines counting money, people sorting it, and boxes upon boxes of cash that is supposed to go into circulation. I literally feel like it's like a drug operation. There's just so much cash on the table, like a lot of cash. And I'm there with my facility representative and the director of the money handling operations. And I asked them, how much money is circulating through this operation right now? And they tell me right now in this very location, there is between $1 to $2 billion right now. So I'm standing in a room with over $1 billion in cash, and there's just money everywhere. And I'm like, holy cow. And we just start joking around like, this is a drug den, cash is king. And You can use cash to hide all sorts of transactions. But it just blew my mind. I was like, that was the moment where I said, I love field work. I love being out in the field. I get to see all sorts of cool things. My inspections in Philadelphia took me to the airport where I got up close to the airplanes. I also inspected the US Mint, so I got to see how coins were made on the ground floor up close.
That's true. That's also in Philadelphia, right? Where do you have several buildings for Mint or only there?
Just one building for the Mint. It's huge. And then in when I worked as a consultant, a lot of our clients were military. I was at a lot of military installations, so I got to see a lot of planes up close. I got to see F-16s up close. I got to see helicopters, all that stuff. So it was cool. Like if you can work out in the field, do it because
I would say at least your first jobs gotta be on field. Then you can go back to the desk.
absolutely.
Okay, Chuku. So thanks for sharing that. I cannot, as I told you, I cannot imagine that much money. Like I tried to guess how much. If they tell me you have 10 minutes to take the cash, how much cash will I be able to take from there? I don't have any idea. Maybe I don't think maybe $1 million cash. Maybe it's too much, but I don't know. I can imagine you being there, watching that much money being processed.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Well, here's the thing: there are cameras everywhere. So even if you tried to take a dollar, if you broke past the glass, glass wall, everything's on camera. You're not going to escape. but
Yeah, sure, definitely.
but yeah, it's a lot of money to like you can't. It's hard to process. You can't, and you don't. It's just a lot of money to like, and it's just cash on the table, in the on the floor, in boxes.
Yeah, well, they treat it as any other product. It's just one thing that gotta be processed.
Absolutely.
So, Chuku, let's talk about. Well, I think we don't have that much right now, but I do see that you wrote on things that we could have or important things to talk about is the importance of hobbies. And I would really like to know why did you added that. I think hobbies are very important, but you adding that I think it's great. So, what type of hobbies do you have? What do you think are important? And anything related to hobbies will be great.
Sure. So two of my hobbies now are fencing and karate. And you need a hobby because work might be great or work might be terrible, but at times it's going to be stressful and you need something to just take your mind off of it. Yeah, you need to decompress and you need something to do that you enjoy doing because you're going to be happier if you do.
What do you do with karate that you enjoy the most? Is it the fighting or is it more the punching or the exercise?
The fighting.
I could imagine that. I just was wanted to assure. And the fencing part was it? Is it because you want to like feel more like a swordsman, or because you enjoy the actual sport? Because I think it's very like sporty type of battle. Because karate is, I don't know how to say, it's not that beautiful because eventually what you want to do is to win. But I
Yep.
think in fencing it's more like an art and movement and all that. So can you tell us a little bit on that?
Sure. So with fencing, it's essentially a sport now. You may have heard of you may have heard of something like classical fencing, and then there are people who don't want anything to do with fencing, and then they do something called HEMA, historical European martial arts. But with sport fencing, yeah, it's you can say it's more like an art, and there are three weapons, and I could go into each one, but I'd be here all evening. But the
Did you
gist,
really enjoy it?
yeah, I really enjoy it. And with fencing, it's kind of like rock paper scissors. You're gonna make an action, and you're hoping that your opponent makes an action that loses to your action.
Nice, nice to hear.
Yeah,
I've seen only once one of my teachers back in high school loved fencing, and he took some fences for like only teacher fighting. And but it was that day. Let's say that I needed to go back, and I was the only student that was able to see that, like hiding and seeing through the window.
yeah,
And I watched them fight, and it was really great. They had the masks. I got curious, because right here, especially in my city, fencing is not a great, like, let's say, a great activity. Right?
Yeah.
I think maybe in Mexico City it's a little bit more common,
Yep.
but not that common. I would say in USA, I think you got very great fencers, right?
Actually, what city do you live in? Where are you from?
Monterrey is
Oh,
northeast, like 2 hours from Texas border.
oh, cool.
Yeah,
Excellent.
it's near. So Chuku, I don't know if you want to add something, or should we pass to the very quick question and answer section?
Let's pass the very quick question and answer session.
Very quickly, what would you add or change or remove from your bachelor life? And it can be anything, not only like study requirements or so.
I would have slept more. I would have done fewer extracurricular activities.
That's a very important tip. That's also underrated. Sleeping is definitely important, especially before exams. People prefer to study like, yeah, I'm going to be studying with caffeine and some energy drinks until 4 a.m. and my exam is 7 a.m. But I think it's way better to sleep because then your memory is more active. So what I will do is actually try to schedule my studying times.
Yep. Avoid the energy drinks. They're not good
Yeah,
for you. And
that's true. That's true. Even though when you're young, energy drinks seem to be cool.
oh, absolutely. I say this as someone who used to partake frequently, but I've since stopped. So
Yeah, stop. Eventually, you need to stop, and the faster you do so, it's better.
absolutely.
Underrated stuff in chemical engineering.
Underrated. That's a really tough one because I think it's going to depend on your program and where you go to school. But I think something that might be underrated are study parties.
Okay, so getting along with fellow uh, students or classmates to study for exams or projects. You mean that?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
your class becomes like your family in a way.
I'm on board with that. Actually, if you have a very great study group, they will demand for you that you need to give your best. And if you're studying alone, you will always compare with yourself, which can either be very great because you demand yourself a lot, or which is more commonly to see, you will demand yourself an average amount.
Yep.
Do you have any favorite engineering book? Or if you don't remember the title or author, what is it about?
I think the name is Giancopoulos.
Oh yeah, for thermodynamics
Not
or
for.
mass transfer, I think.
I think it would be for. Yeah, I think it would be for no transport and separation process.
Yeah, it's true. I like it, but I'm not great fan of that book, of that author. I would say because I read more on his work. I like it, but I don't know. It's not a great fit for me. Even though the content is great, but I don't like it the way I like to learn. It's not my favorite, but great to know it. Do you still have it?
I don't, but funny thing, I had while at the University of Pennsylvania, I had a number of professors who've written books or who are referenced in correlations that you all might have studied. If you're ever familiar with the name Warren D. Cedar,
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
you might come across one of his books. I think he did product and process design principles. He's really big on process design and
Okay.
Aspen. So if you ever do that, you might come across his name.
No, it doesn't sound familiar, but I will check. Maybe I already read it and I don't remember the name.
No worries. And then one of my senior design advisor was Stuart Churchill. I think, one of the interesting things we got to learn about him, even in his late 80s, early 90s, he was still incredibly smart and incredibly sharp. But there is a correlation, I believe, that's named after him.
Churchill, maybe. Sounds a little bit familiar, but I will need to check it again. But I do know that in Pennsylvania you get a lot of talent, especially back in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you still use books for reference, and which are them if if you use them?
I do not at the moment. A lot of the stuff I need is either available on EPA's website or on our state's website, or we have the information in house.
Yeah, I would say because it's government, maybe you have some special reference, right?
Not just that, but it's we've accumulated a lot of information, all of which is publicly available, but it's
Okay.
a lot of it's based on the literature that's out there. So I think anything that might suffice would be, if you have a book, a textbook on air pollution control, that's a good substitute too.
Okay, okay. So, which was the subject that you hated, or maybe that you had a lot of problems with?
Fluid dynamics, hated that class. Absolutely hated
What? No, bro, fluid dynamics, your air quality has some fluid dynamics, isn't?
Yeah, but we're not doing Navier Stokes. We're not
Okay.
doing that stuff. And a lot of air quality is like the calculations are simple for the most part.
Yeah, like flow rate, concentration, and then you length of the stake, or how to say it, the chimney
Yeah, stack
stack.
heights,
Sorry, yeah,
stack
stack.
diameter, and a lot of the how to calculate emissions. It's pretty simple. It's either a mass balance or we use something called an emission factor, which is just a type of factor that's based on some sort of research that was done.
That's important to consider for you guys, you students. Make no worries. The heavy engineering is typically always simplified. Did you, so we were talking about your jobs, but I want to ask you if you had any non-chemical engineering or in general a job that didn't require a degree, maybe waiting tables or maybe at the shop counter, anything.
Sure. So prior to working with the city of Philadelphia, I worked in my one of my professor's laboratories doing algae research, and we were just growing algae in the lab all day. And and at the same time, I was working at a museum attached to our university that specialized in archaeology and anthropology, and that was pretty cool.
So who would you like to trade jobs with? And it can be either 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, let's say. Doesn't need to fill every time, but something that you would say, it will be cool to be professor for 1 year, or maybe be a doctor for 1 week.
That's a tricky one. I would like to be a professional athlete for a season.
Nice. Which sport?
Probably soccer.
What's your favorite team?
Favorite team? It would depend on the country, but overall would probably be Manchester United.
One season there in the UK. That's interesting.
Yep. So a funny thing, growing up when I was younger, before I got access to the British Premier League, I watched a lot of La Liga. A lot of my friends, when I was growing up, a lot of them were immigrants from Mexico or from Central America, and my school was split between two teams,
Which ones?
Chivas.
Oh, damn, bro. That's
And I'm so sorry to disappoint you, but I rooted for Chivas a lot, even though the team kind of has a interesting history of previously only, I think, having Mexican-born players.
true. They still have that, and I don't know. They have Chivas USA. I don't know how do they operate, but back here, still they try to have only Mexican players, which is the only club which tries to do so. All others will, of course, have some amount of Mexicans players, but they will buy players in, especially in Latin America, South America. They
Yep.
will buy them.
Yep.
So that's funny to hear that that actually those are the largest, the biggest ones.
Yeah.
Doesn't surprise me that much. Your dream job, Chuku.
Dream job. Ooh, I'd probably be a writer.
Nice. Literature. Sorry, any romantic, drama, suspense, thrill.
Probably musical theater.
Wow, I didn't expect it. Nice.
So
What was the best advice you were given?
that's a tricky one. Is it just specific to chemical?
No, it can be general. In general, can be life advice, love advice, sport advice.
Right. I think the best advice I've received is to try to understand a point of view, try to expose yourself to a point of view that is not your own and that makes you uncomfortable.
To feel empathy or
Yeah, on some level, empathy, but yeah, it would be empathy, but just expose yourself to different viewpoints, especially ones that you don't agree with, because everybody has something to say and everybody has a reason for why they believe what they believe, even if you hate that person's point of view.
Nah, that's even harder, I would say.
No, it is. It's a hard lesson, but that advice came from my dad, and he kind of lived it. So,
A good advice. That's definitely good advice. It helps a lot to understand others and especially to resolve conflict.
yep.
One, maybe one or two last. How long does the world has left, according to, of course, our activity?
Whew,
Do you
whew.
think it's going to end soon? Do you think we're going to fix it? What I would like to hear this from a environmental engineer.
Sure. I think in the short term, things are likely to get worse, but I think as a species, we're still going to continue to live. We're still going to adapt. We're still going to find ways to grow and to prosper. Do I think the worst is still ahead? Probably, but after that, we will recover. We will sort of address our losses, and then we will continue to move on. It's how we got here. It's how we're going to make it in the future. Because they're talk mention any decade, and I can talk about turmoil that occurred in some part of the world or that engulfed the whole world.
Yes, definitely always something special occurs. So I think we will also manage. So I like the optimism, especially from a environmental engineer. So thank you for letting me know that it's going to be, or that worse is yet to come, but we're going to pass it.
Yep.
Okay, and last one for professional life. What do you think is the future of chemical engineering with the industry 4.0, and especially in the US? I think a lot of students are not any longer interested that much into chemical engineering, either because they don't have good jobs or maybe because other type of profiles are interesting for them, maybe computer science or so. So what do you think, are is chemical engineering still a cool field to be, and is it going to last long, or do you think it's going to change into more specific engineering type, or what do you think overall?
Chemical engineering is still going to be here. At the end of the day, look at the products in your house. Look at the cheese. If you drink beer, look at beer, alcohol. Look at, you put gasoline in your car. All of those products and more require some form of chemical engineering, process engineering, some form of design. I think it's one of the oldest professions. If you make your own beer, you make your own cheese, you're in a way a chemical engineer. You just haven't had like the formal training, but as a field, I still think it's going to exist as, as an umbrella, but there's probably going to be more niche sub fields below it that will just add to it. And I think what is happening now, and from what I've heard, there's kind of a glut in chemical engineers in certain industries. And I think that is going to correct itself in the coming years. But I still think there's going to be a strong interest in the study. There are always going to be people who want to go into the field. And I think it's going to, do I think it's going to change a little bit, but it's just going to be additive in its changes.
Yeah, I also think so. It's going to be getting more specific. Maybe your bachelor title is an example of it. It's no longer just chemical engineering, but chemical engineering for biomolecular design,
Yeah.
and maybe some chemical engineering for manufacturing. And I think it's going to get more specific. And the good thing I see right now is that maybe chemical engineering went so popular. Of course, within its sizes. I don't mean like super popular, but
Yep.
popular in its size. Right now, it's let's say saturated of chemical engineers. So what's happening, I see, is that people is hearing these stories that there are no longer chemical engineering needs or requirements. So what's happening is less people is going to those fields, and eventually, in some 10 to 20 years, we will see a drop on chemical engineers, and once again, the cycle is going to increase the requirement or demand for chemical engineers. That's my guess. Chuku, let's go to the very random facts questions. Coffee, tea, or energy drink for being active in the workplace?
Coffee.
What do
Uh,
you use? Latte?
Creamer, creamer,
Creamer.
cream and sugar.
Nice.
My fiance likes to joke that I put way too much cream and sugar in my coffee.
Okay, so is it not coffee after all? It's more a creamy sugar mixed with a little bit hint of coffee.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I'll give you that. That's really accurate.
Do you have any favorite series that you will recommend us, especially for engineers or overall?
Favorite series specifically for engineers. Not a favorite series specifically, but there is a particular episode that kind of skirts the history of air quality a little bit, intersects it. It's an episode in the first season of The Crown on Netflix, and it deals with the London fog. Watch it and look up the background of the London fog. It was one of those air quality events where I believe sulfur dioxide emissions were forced to the ground level, and it just caused this huge fog. And people thought it was just the weather, but it was actually, the effect of, coal mining and other industries and a temperature inversion that forced that smoke down to the ground level. So watch that. Shows in general that I would recommend regardless of whether or not you're an engineer, probably The Wire.
Okay, it's nice. It's fine. It's fine. Okay. Well, that was the last of the quick questions, Chuku. I don't know if you want to add something to wrap up the show, or if we should just finish this.
I think one thing I would like to add is that to those who are still students, when you graduate, you're never going to stop learning and never stop trying to learn, especially when about your job, about the field you're in, or just random things in general. Like always be trying to learn something new.
Talking about, and especially with this pandemic, I think you can make some tips or recommendations for those that get or graduate and are in this type of, let's say, turmoil or chaos, and the job market is not great. You've been there, Chuku. So, what are your tips? What can you recommend to the students that are right now graduating?
Sure. One thing I can't stress enough is to make sure that your resume is current and make sure that the grammar has been fixed, everything flows. And one thing that I like to, stress to people whose resumes that I look over is even if, you haven't had an internship, let's just say, you're a new grad and you worked part-time somewhere. In your experience section, you want to talk about how the job you did had an impact, positive impact for your employer. Let's say that you are a server and your service led to increased customer satisfaction, which led to increased ratings on Yelp. That's something that matters. So you need to make your resume say what you did for your employer, how it helped, because you're trying to show your prospective employer what you could do for them. And then another thing I would recommend is just to kind of broaden your job search. If you find that you're focused on one particular field because that's the field of your dreams, you might have to take a detour and you might have to jump into another field that you might not have anticipated, but it's a way to get your foot in the door with the knowledge that it's not forever. You can always go back to the field of your dreams, or you might find that you like this new field a lot and you want to stay here. So be open, look into different types of industries. If you can, polish your interview skills. One thing that I do when I prepare for interviews is I make a bunch of questions and then I write answers to them. Those questions may never come up, but it's a way for me to get my thoughts out so they are there when I need them. And it's also practice on how to generate thoughts on the fly for me because I'm pretty bad at interviewing. So I had to do that.
That's a good tip. I would say always practice beforehand the questions that you are going to be asked, most likely.
Yep.
So, Chuku, thank you very much for joining me in this episode. I really enjoy it. I think that quality of air is very important, especially in metropolis, which are each time getting worse and worse. And of course, in the industry overall, not because we are not near the industry, doesn't mean that we can throw away all those emissions or pollutants. So, Chuku, Once again, thank you. And guys, thank you for joining us. We will see each other in another episode. Bye bye. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And before you go, I will really appreciate it if you take the time to share this podcast with your fellow colleagues, classmates, friends, or really anyone that might be interested on the topic of chemical engineering and its related fields. If you found this content helpful and valuable, please consider subscribing, rating, and leaving a review. Thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot.